is here. I love the future. First of all, I am here to basically talk about a couple things. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm gonna be really, really short, but toxic masculinity. How many of you guys have heard all that, the phrase toxic masculinity? It's been used a lot. Everybody's been talking about it, you know. Another way I like to put it is basically abusers of power, okay? You know, I came up from Flint, Michigan. I was an athlete. I played 7 years in the NFL. Flint, Michigan was a very depressed area. And I also came up in a very, very violent household. One of my earliest memories was my father, I probably was like 4 or 5 years old, my father punching my mother in the face as hard as he could. That was one of my earliest memories. And you know, through trauma, you learn your lessons. For me, it was, hey, this man, the strongest man I've ever seen, this guy, he uses his power to abuse my mother. I learned simply because I was a man, or he was a man, or the people around me who were men, they were more valuable than women. This is how it was for me coming up in Flint, Michigan. And this is funny because people say, you know, it's toxic masculinity. I mean, don't women do things wrong too and the whole thing? But you got to understand, men and women are very, very different. One thing I noticed coming up in the hood, it was kind of wild because everyone uses their thing to manipulate people. Like, you know, women tend to be manipulated through fear. When I was coming up, the whole thing, if you were, you know, I came up in a crack epidemic where, you know, there were pimps and people who were basically treating women as property, and their whole thing was to intimidate. My father using fear to intimidate my mother. And he would basically manipulate her through fear. But men tend to be manipulated through pride. And pride is what is the lifeblood of toxic masculinity. When guys are always like, hey man, I bet you won't do this. And I bet you I will. And the whole thing it's about, you know, the challenge, you know, if you ever see 5 men walking somewhere, they're probably on their way to do something really stupid. I'm just telling you, because there's nobody there to calm them down. And let me tell you something. The perfect example of toxic masculinity I can give is, let's say you have a restaurant. And a restaurant has a sign in the bathroom and it says, hey, all employees must wash their hands. But you notice when the boss comes in, who's a man, and if the boss is a guy, he's gonna come in, and you notice the boss never washes his hands. And so he goes in the kitchen, he's touching the food, he's doing his thing, and the employees are like, man, I don't think the boss ever washed his hands. So what happens is somebody has to tell him, and it's usually the manager, and they tell the manager to go over there and tell him and the whole deal, and all of a sudden, the manager goes over to him, he says, boss, I'm so sorry, we noticed you didn't wash your hands. Could you please wash your hands? And the boss says, oh, yeah, thank you for telling me, you're fired. Then all the employees immediately know, never ever confront the boss about anything. Now you have slipped into a toxic environment, very, very slowly. All the employees are now behind enemy lines. Now they are, if you ever come up to the boss and say anything to him, you are now at risk. You are now a problem that needs to be eradicated instead of an employee that has good suggestions. And I'm trying to tell you, I was a part of this. I was guilty. I believe because I was a man, I was more valuable. And it was my way or the highway with my own family. And I developed so many bad things that I had to totally eradicate in my life. I had to go to rehab to beat a pornography addiction. There were other things in my life that I knew because of this masculinity issue, this pride issue that did not allow me to hear the truth. And let me tell you, there's a word that a lot of people use in these circles. Silence is violence. Your predator, anyone who's giving you that kind of trauma, depends on your silence. They depend on you being quiet. They depend on you being scared. They depend on you not telling him to go wash his hands. But I'm telling you, my wife told me, I need to go wash my hands. She was fearless. And I'm here to tell you that this era, you guys are the future, man. But I promise you, and I promise you this, that when you stand for the right thing, and you do the right thing, and you tell them to go wash their hands, you are going to have the support of good people. Because usually these guys are one and few. And they run a lot of people. Usually one predator is responsible for so much damage, it takes them years to get caught. So I want to thank you for having me here today. It's been a pleasure. And I'm trying to tell you, man, you guys, you're the future, and I love it. It's making me feel good. I only had 10 minutes, but thank you very much. Love you. It's so, Thank you.